Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about Meltwaters and the Hole with an Endless Bottom. My name is Agent J.A., and this is Chronicles of the Explained and Unexplained. This is the story not many people know about that I believe is very interesting, but I will let you all decide. Late one night in 1997, a call was received at Coast to Coast AM, hosted by Art Bell. The caller named Meltwaters came on the air. He sounded calm, not theatrical, which made the story land harder. Mel claimed he owned remote land near Ellensburg, Washington. On it sat something he couldn't explain. At first it sounded like an abandoned well, but Mel insisted it wasn't. No echo came back when objects were dropped. No splash, no sound of impact, just nothing. Eerie silence. He claimed locals had been using the hole as a dumping site for years-old appliances, trash, debris, yet the hole never filled, never changed. Mel said he tried to measure its depth using what he had: fishing line, weight, and patience. Mel had been an avid shark fisherman, and the first thing that came to mind was to attach a 1-pound weight to a brand new fishing spool. The weight didn't reach the bottom. Then he attached another 5,000-foot spool to the first, then another and another, until he reached 80,000 feet, roughly 15 miles deep. Shockingly, the line never hit bottom. This process of combining fishing lines happened over the course of several weeks. The next thing that came to Meltwaters' mind was to test the hole for water. So he decided to try an old fisherman's trick that involved threading a whole roll of lifesavers at the end of the line and putting it back down for some time to see if the candy would dissolve. If the candy would dissolve, that would mean that there was water on the bottom of the hole. Remember, this fishing line was already 15 miles long. Shockingly, the lifesavers came back dry and intact, concluding that they'd never touch water. One of the earliest unsettling clues that locals talked about was that dogs refused to go near the hole. They acted different. Even when dragged close, the dogs would panic. They would dig their claws into the ground in fear to avoid getting close to it. In rural areas, animals usually explore everything, but not around this hole. They seemed to avoid the hole, and even birds would fly around it. Then came the incident that turned curiosity into fear. A neighbor's dog had died. Like others before it, the body was thrown into the hole. Days later, the dog returned alive, healthy, walking through the area as if nothing had happened. Mel insisted it was the same animal, same markings, same behavior. No explanation, no injuries, no decay, just alive. But there was something very wrong with the dog. It was a hunter's dog, very well trained. This dog had the same collar as his dead dog that he himself had thrown into this hole, so he assumed it was his old dog. The hunter tried calling out to the dog, but the dog would not listen to him. The dog ran into the woods and was never seen again. That's when Mel began to believe the hole wasn't just deep, it was doing something. As Mel continued experimenting, things became even stranger. Metal objects lowered into the hole sometimes came back magnetized. Radios and electronic equipment nearby behaved erratically. The air around the hole occasionally felt unnaturally still or heavy. Some who heard the story speculated a magnetic anomaly, a gravitational disorientation, or something not bound by known physics. Meltwaters also described a strange thermal effect. Despite the environment, the hole seemed to emit a cold presence. Not just temperature, but something deeper, like an absence of energy. Looking into it didn't just reveal darkness. It felt like the darkness was absorbing the light itself. After Meltwaters shared his story publicly, everything changed. He claimed that shortly after his appearance on the Art Bell, Coast to Coast AM radio show, officials dressed in black tuxedos began visiting his property. Questions were asked. Measurements were taken. Then came the offer. Mel said he was approached and given a deal. a significant amount of money, in exchange for leaving his land and never speaking about it again. He had no choice but to accept. It was made clear to him by these men that if he did not accept their generous offer, they would make sure a drug lab would be found in his property that would land him in jail. Mel had no choice but to accept. The conditions were that he would have to move to another country and lease his property to these people. According to the interviews with Art Bell, the deal was that he would get paid $3 million a year in exchange for not coming back to the United States. He was not to make any contact with friends or relatives, but simply leave them to wonder what happened to him. He was funded his relocation to Australia, where he lived for a few years. At first, everything was good. He was living a lavish lifestyle with nothing to worry about, and an account full of money. This money was being deposited to him monthly. After so much of this life, Mel Waters began to miss his old life. He began to feel lonely and miss his friends and family. He couldn't tell them anything about his present life. He had simply vanished into thin air and nobody knew anything about him for 5 whole years. He had been given a new name, new life, and new identity. By this time, he had already been paid $15 million. Too much to spend it all. He grew tired of keeping this secret and decided to contact Art Bell in Coast to Coast AM radio show. He set up a meeting where he was supposed to go on air and talk publicly about everything going on in his life since he found the bottomless hole. Upon returning to the U.S., Mel Waters claimed he was intercepted by authorities shortly after visiting or contacting his nephew, which led to a period where he was missing. He believed he was abducted, claiming to have woken up in a San Francisco alley 12 days later. Mysteriously, some of his teeth were missing and he had no memory of the preceding. Because so many days had passed, he never made it to Art Bell's broadcast show. Mel Waters lost everything, including his property and his lease. His bank account had been cleared. Mel was then contacted by the Native Americans and Basque. They wanted to find out more about his story and verify that he was not involved with any government branch. When they saw that Mel was safe to speak with, they told him about the existence of another bottomless hole that was located in Nevada in a Native American reservation. Mel was taken to see the hole. It was the same size and diameter as the one in his old property. The only difference he noted was that instead of having a stone retention wall, this one had a metal collar around the hole. The Basque tribe, who herded sheep, told Mel that the hole had been there for over 200 years and was sacred to them. When Mel got close to the hole, he dropped his tool on the metal collar. Much to his surprise, it made no sound when the tool hit. He also noticed that the metal collar was warm to the touch. Mel and the Basque started experimenting on the hole. First, they lowered a bucket of ice into the hole and kept another bucket of ice above the hole as a control to see if the ice would melt faster inside the hole or it would be the same as the one above the hole. The bucket that was lowered turned into a white substance and was no longer cold or wet. In fact, it looked like rock salt. This would happen 1 out of 3 times. They tried to melt the ice over a fire to see what would happen, and to their surprise, the ice that was no longer cold or wet caught fire. And not only that, the fire continued burning for months. At this point, one of the bravest Basque warriors said that he would volunteer to be lowered down into the hole. But it was decided that this was a bad idea, so they decided to lower down a sheep inside a cage. The sheep didn't want to go. The closer it got, the more it tried to get out of the cage by kicking its way out. They lowered the cage down to 1,000 feet, which was the same distance they would lower the bucket of ice. By this point, the cage stopped moving and they left it there for 30 minutes. When they brought it back up, the sheep had no movement, which meant it must have not survived. The Basque, who were shepherds, knew how to butcher a sheep. They took the sheep to a table to perform an autopsy since The sheep showed no signs of blood or mutilation. They wanted to know how this happened. The first thing they noticed when they opened up the sheep is that it seemed to have been cooked from the inside. Taking up almost the entire cavity of the sheep's body was what Mel described as a giant tumor. Then the tumor started moving. After seeing that, they decided to cut the tumor open. To their shock, what was inside the tumor was something so strange. It was like a fetus of a baby seal, which was attached to the sheep by the umbilical cord. But this creature was not a seal. It had the eyes of a human. They kept looking at the creature in astonishment as it slowly crawled to the edge of the table where the autopsy was performed. Seeing this, Mel noticed the seal acted as if he wanted to get back to the hole. So Mel picked it up even though the creature had some sort of darkness to it. It was slimy and had the smell of sulfur. He carried it to near the edge of the hole, but the creature stayed still and did not jump into the hole. Instead, it kept staring at them for a couple of hours. The creature gave them a final look and jumped back into the hole. Now, going back to this story, Mel had been diagnosed with advanced esophagus cancer and was given only 6 months to live. This hadn't happened before going to Nevada. So after this experience, Mel was somehow cancer-free. There was no explanation but to believe that he must have been cured by this magical creature. Doctors were astounded and didn't understand how this happened. A few months later, Mel returned to Coast, and with Art Bell, something crazy happened with the bucket of ice that had been lowered into the hole. One of the Basques took it to his home to where he could use it to keep his place warm. He placed it in an old stove that required fire. Instead of using firewood like he always did, he decided to use the bucket of burning fire that had once been lowered into the hole, since this fire would burn for months. Something strange started to happen. It started pulling the moisture out of all the air. The air in his place was always dry. Now his skin was always dry and he was always thirsty. Any steam in his home would be seen being pulled into the stove. He didn't think much of this, and this went on for months. But then one day, the stove suddenly sunk through the wooden floor and into the ground in his home. But the stove was still warm, so he just patched up the floor and continued to use the hole for warmth. Strange and unsettling things began happening. Unexplained noises, odd phenomena, and a general sense that something wasn't right. So he went to go live with his brother. Months passed by and he returned to check up on his land where his home had once stood. The only thing that remained of that house was the stove, and now the stove had been buried 5 feet under the dirt. The stovetop was now at ground level. It was slowly sinking. It looked like the stove was making another bottomless hole, but now it was a smaller one. They tried to pull out the stove in fear of what might happen if it continued sinking. It was so stuck in the ground they had to use a crane to lift it out. It is unclear what happened after the stove was removed. The Basque people claimed to have been visited by the magical creature that was inside the sheep. The creature warned them that the white substance is dangerous and must not fall into the wrong hands, as this could lead to the destruction of the whole planet. The last time Mel Waters got in touch with Art Bell, he talked about going back to take pictures and gather evidence of what he had experienced with the Basque people. No evidence was ever submitted. Mel Waters was never seen or heard from again. So is this story true or just a hoax? I truly believe Mel, but I also believe there are a lot of missing pieces to this story. You can still find the original Mel's Hole interviews with Art Bell scattered across the internet. What do you think? I'll let you decide if you think it's real or not. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. This is Agent J.A. and this is Chronicles of the Explained and Unexplained. Have a wonderful day and always keep your mind open. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video as much as I did.